I will try and make the point for the African continent. But having said this, whatever I will say, I think it resonates with other parts of the world where we are increasingly referring to the importance of institutions. Now, as you know, on the continent of Africa, and also this also applies to my country, Mauritius, most countries in Africa, we have just over 50 years of post-independence history. And you know, during the colonial setup, all institutions were producing, graduates, producing civil servants, precisely to man the country, which of course was under the colonial power. So they were generating more and more civil servants, right? Trained in the social studies, public administration. So all these were actually they were the output of universities to provide for a setup which was already there. So when the colonial powers left many of our countries, in fact, most of the African continent, we find that this model of university, for example, has remained the same. And the mindset in many countries is that education, health, social security net, all these are the problems which are for other people to look after. Right? It doesn't have to come from within. So this mindset has perpetuated, and Africa has had a very violent history as well, in as much as governments were changing through coups and through wars, and we've had all that. Now that things are moving on, now that countries are now training the people more, we're finding a mass of young people of a certain age who are educated, who are looking at things from a different prism. And then just to put again on the side some of the economic indicators for Africa, we have the youngest continent. We have the age bracket will be between 16 to 18. Technology is very much present. Africa has 60% of the arable land in the world. Africa is the blue continent. Africa has got tremendous amount of resources, and Africa has got even the Sahara from where we can generate renewable energy, if anything else. So to me, all the indicators are there, but Africa is also a continent which is going to be increasingly urbanized. So by 2050, 70% of the population of the African continent will be living in cities. So that's another thing that we'll have to grapple with eventually, because we'll touch on, for example, climate change and how all these will impact the continent and of course elsewhere as well. So we come back now to institution building on the continent. So universities have not, in fact, many universities in Africa, they don't appear in the 500 listed universities in the world. They're very, very few. And many of them you'll find, of course, in South Africa or in some other places across the continent. So we have a big task ahead of us to actually consolidate and in some cases literally build the institution so that we can have reference centers from where data can be generated. And I insist on data because we are seeing right now the lack of data means that we can't shape the policy with the appropriate data which is coming from the ground. So building institutions to generate this data so we can shape policy, which of course are relevant to speak to our reality on the continent there. Now, this is of course in terms of the academic side, in terms of the education side. Now, what about the health sector? The health sector has also been the orphan child on the continent. We haven't really invested in the health system. And when I talk about health system, I'm not talking about the sophisticated high-end side of the health system. I'm talking about public health, general basic public health, which has to be deployed across the continent, if anything else, to counteract COVID as we speak. Because if you look at what the WHO, for example, is formulating, it is saying that just by washing your hands and wearing a mask, you could stem back a lot of the infections. Now, so the health system is a challenge. It is not being kind of capitalized as it should be. And if we don't build on it, if we don't actually invest in it, we'll find ourselves, of course, at the mercy of all sorts of pandemics. And unfortunately, with climate change, of course, it's the next issue we'll have to grapple with once we have finished with COVID, is we shall see that there will be more pandemics to come through. The third point I would like to bring on board, and also it concerns institutions, is how do we provide for the social safety net to our people? Because people who are sick, who don't go to work, do they get compensated by the state? Kids who have lost their parents, does the state help them in providing some form of allowance per month so that that kid can grow up? I mean, all these things have to be brought on board. And again, when I talk about education, when I talk about health, when I talk about social safety net, to me, these are not expenses. To me, these are investment. It is investment in the people. Just to give you an idea, in terms of provision of social safety net, those countries that have good social safety net, these are precisely those countries where people tend to be more innovative. People can take leave of absence. People can change jobs because they know there is a state there that is going to provide for these people who don't have a job, for example. And yet we find some of the richest countries in the world, they provide threadbare social safety net, which means that sometimes people get stuck in the same job because they don't want to lose, for example, the health insurance. So these are things that we have to put in place in our countries so that we can cope with pandemics as and when they arise, and we will provide them with the necessary tools, if anything else, in terms of preparedness and in terms of course, provision for food, for access to basic healthcare, and to all the other issues that, of course, we shall be talking about later on in the conversation. Thank you.
An important point there, and I think in particular in regards to communication being so key and putting it in a translatable and understandable language, so it's not, as you say, one and all and assumed that we know. I think that's such a crucial point, especially when you extend it into climate issues as well.
Yeah, and one thing as well is that we have to be as candid as possible so that we can get the trust of the people. They have to be communicated in a language so that they can trust, in data that they can relate to. And this is where the trust of the community has to be gained up front in this battle, because if you start providing information which they don't believe what is happening on the ground, and also the gossip, because a lot of fake information is going around. So leaders who are communicative have to be there to communicate properly, to communicate the right information, and to give the right data and the right advice. Because this is very, very key in a time of a pandemic for people to keep trusting institutions. In terms of holistic aspect, there are many such organizations at the level of the UN, and it needs to be reshaped, because I can see overlap between, for example, what UNICEF is doing, and that overlaps with the UNHCR. The work of UNICEF, there may be overlapping issues with WHO, for example, and the World Food Programme, because if we don't want silos, we'll have to relook at all these organizations because there are many overlaps. Whomsoever is looking at food issues necessarily will impact the health of that child or that person, and all the rest of it. So definitely there will have to be at some point, there is a lot of discussion again at international level between countries. And since the UN had been created immediately after the Second World War, the world has changed tremendously. The world has changed tremendously. And just to put these things very, very bluntly, 70% of the UN Security Council agenda is about African issues, and there's not a representative of Africa on the UN Security Council. So these are questions which are increasingly coming across in multilateral fora, where people are questioning the way the whole governance structure at these institutions, the way they're performing. And there, in some places, in some quarters, there is a lot of nervousness to actually relook at these structures. In some cases, the countries, the regions, they're very forceful to say that, look, the world has changed since 1949, and we need to relook at this because we want our place at the table. And at the same time, if these institutions, these countries are going to lead, going to put money, they will want more result. They will want to see more data, more results on the ground. And they will also like to see less overlap and much more focused actions where they will be cross-cutting. We will not be going into this silo attitude for example, World Food Programme, WHO, UNICEF, and this, that, and the other, UNHCR, all these operating in silos, and yet the problems are the same. We are going towards the security and the safety and the health of the person. So all these organizations, they really need to relook at the agenda and refocus and reassess the way we have been doing so that countries and regions and institutions putting money into these organizations, they also get value for money in terms of output and results. COVID has revealed our lack of preparedness in many instances, but I still think that there will be a silver lining from the COVID, in as much as it will teach us to do things differently. We will find that there will be an increasing use of technology from now on. So I think to us scientists and to us technologists, it's a very good thing. But I think to the common people as well, they'll know that it's possible to do things differently and to pollute less, and to do things so that we look at solidarity as being the way forward. And we have seen that already during the COVID, that people tend to be less selfish. And I think if we start thinking like this, we will be saving ourselves on the planet, because I hate to say we are saving the planet, because we're not. We'll be saving ourselves on this planet. So let us go ahead with new technology, with more solidarity, and also with a lot of empathy and compassion towards each other. So I think this is what, to me, what the COVID has shown us over the past few weeks.